This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Well, hello and welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southward Church, and I'm with Scott, our lead pastor. We want to let you know that if you have not already liked or subscribed to our content, to be sure to do so that way you don't miss out on anything new. And we are in our series, No Offense.
Yes.
We're in week 3. It's been a great series. And this week you covered the topic of anger.
Yep.
How there's really no such thing as righteous anger that maybe we've been taught or bought into, that it's not a fruit of the Spirit. So let's just hit on that a little bit more and also talk about how that anger in and of itself is not a sin.
Yeah.
We're just not supposed to allow that to lead us to sin.
Yeah, it was kind of so interesting to me that I've even taught previously and heard it, and then as I went out and searched it, you can find countless Christian blogs and Christian living articles on how righteous anger is a part of the Christian life. And then as you actually go to the scriptures, it's just glaringly absent outside of the examples that we get that are God. And because we're not God, we don't get to not everything that God gets to do, we get to do because we're not God. That blew my mind. That righteous anger, and I walked through all the major passages that people point to, and there's a translation of Ephesians 4. It's actually in a lot of major translations too, which it's just I just don't think it's a great translation of it.
Right.
But when I said there's not one single command for us to be angry in all of the New Testament, there are some translations that take the Ephesians 4 passage and they translate it as "be angry and do not sin."
Right.
And without trying to be condescending, you would have to be really simple to think that is a command.
To be angry.
Yeah, to read that as "be angry and do not sin." You would have to be coming at that in a way as to you're trying to prove a point, rather than just hey, let's think about this. What does the whole of Scripture have to say about the topic of anger? It's probably not telling us to be angry. It's saying, in a sense, the better translation is probably when you're angry.
Yes.
So be angry, right? So okay, so you're angry and do not sin. The point of the passage is not to get angry. The point of the passage is when anger happens, because it will happen.
Right.
To not sin.
Yeah.
And and what we have to differentiate there is, it's clear that anger is not sin. Because if anger was sin, then the passage would just say, "Do not get angry."
Right.
For it's a sin. But what it says is, when you're angry, do not sin. Which means the human condition is we're going to get angry. Yesterday, or I guess this comes out on Wednesday, so Sunday, was not about how you shouldn't get angry. It's how you should not hold on to the anger. It shouldn't be the motivating factor in your life. Something more powerful should be that motivator. And that's what's happening with this topic is we think that we need anger to get stuff done. That's actually not true. What we need is a greater measure of love to actually get stuff done.
Yeah.
If I'm angry, whatever I try to do when I'm angry, even if it's for a good cause, I still mess it up so bad. There's been so many times I could be 100% right in a situation, someone else 100% wrong. Maybe somebody fumbled the ball, here at church, right? And it's man, that's going to be a big deal. And it made me angry. And then as I tried to go do something about that, Like, then I handled it wrong. Even though I could be 100% wrong, the other person could be 100% in the wrong, and, like, maybe it is a major deal. But because I went to it angry, I messed it up further than actually fixing it, whereas had I just gone and handled the situation in love, it wouldn't have gotten to the situation that it was. And that's just true of everything. Like, if you're, like, just pick whatever it is in the world that you're you're fussy about right now. Like, if you were to go in love in that situation, you're going to have a better chance of actually fixing what it is that you're upset about. Because the minute that you come in angry, the other person's going to respond with anger, and nothing's going to get solved.
Right.
You're not going to hear each other. You're not going to be able to reason with one another. Even if you feel like your anger is justified, I promise you, in the long run, it's not going to have the desired effects whatsoever. It's going to turn into a shouting match, or it's going to turn into gossip, or it's going to turn into you giving someone the cold shoulder, or whatever it is. Or it's going to turn into you being angry and not doing anything, and your inaction towards injustice is every bit as wrong as the injustice itself.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, that anger just doesn't fix anything, and we have been sold a lie.
Yeah.
We have been told that being offended and that being angry, righteously angry, that this is what it takes to get stuff done in the world. And it's like, well, then why is nothing getting better? Why does everyone seem to think everything is getting worse, but we keep getting peddled this lie? If you'll just get madder about it, then things will get better. And it's like, well, I mean, this is as mad as I've ever seen our country. And nothing is getting better. It's only getting worse. And so maybe we could try something different. Maybe we could try love. Maybe we could try understanding and patience. And not because, well, let's just take a weak position towards everything. It's like, no, let's just try to be more effective than what we're currently being, because all of our outrage and anger and offendedness, it's not doing anything. It's not having the desired effect that they told us it was going to have.
Yeah. One of the things that I think about, like, is that James scripture about, being quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. Like, when somebody says something that I totally disagree with, or that, I think is wrong, I have this tendency to where what I try to do is become curious in that moment, where, so somebody says, I'm sorry, I don't believe in female pastors. I get curious and I want to know why. Like, why do you? Like, where does that come from? And I listen. I just listen and hear them out. And then most of the time, they don't really have a great explanation for it. Like, often it's, well, I just don't believe it because that's what my parents believed, or that's whatever. But they can't actually show me or explain it where scripture actually backs it or not. Like, they have trouble in those instances. But then even like within someone who, say someone is a racist, like, you can be angry about racism, but instead of focusing on the anger, like, get behind that and say, you're angry about that because you love the people that are being hurt by that. And if we can try to work through that anger to say, okay, why am I so angry about it? It's because these people matter and I love them and I don't like to see them hurt. Like, that's why those things anger God. Like,
but even responding to something like racism with anger,
right.
We had the example on Sunday. Martin Luther King Jr. himself said, I must not harbor anger. He knew the secret that all of the fussing and the fighting and the anger, even though it would have been warranted with what he was facing and what he was fighting for, he knew it wouldn't do any good.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, I think it was in Brant Hanson's book, towards the end. I don't know if you finished it or not, but towards the end, he told a story about a female speaker who was also African American who preached. And, like, before she had to get up to speak, the pastor brought her into her office and was very hostile towards her, was very, like, whatever. And she was like, I can't understand this. Well, then after the service was over, after she got done speaking, he calls her back in. And she's nervous, because she's like, I don't want to go back into that. He is in tears, just absolute tears, brokenhearted, because he confesses to her. He says, I'm racist. Like, and my dad's racist. And, like, I just thought, there is no way I can hear from this woman and But God, in that moment, used her to speak to him, and he realized, oh, there's no way that I should be feeling this way. And so something special happened, but she hugged him and asked him, she said, can I meet your father? And met him and hugged him. And like in that moment, she could have chose to be completely angry, but God wouldn't have been able to use her in that moment to share love and his word with him in that way, to where something broke within him and he began to shift his mind. Like that to me was like a wonderful story to show, like when you still love people, even those people who are horrible and hostile towards you and whatever, there can be amazing things that happen from that. But when we're too focused on the anger, it blocks any of that being able to happen.
I think some people are also just misunderstanding what's being said in the series.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not saying that you're not going to get upset or angry,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying that like stuff stops bothering you,
Right.
because that's just the human condition. That's part of being a human, is to go, oh, there's something not right there. That bothers me. I don't like that. I don't agree with that. And there's a sense in which it's heartbreaking. It's burdensome. But does it have to create hostility in me?
Right.
Because I'm telling, just the hostility just doesn't help.
Right.
Every time I come into a situation angry, I just make a total mess of it, even if I'm 100% right. And I can only imagine how all of us responding in anger have made bigger and bigger messes and wonder why everything keeps getting worse. Rather than like, okay, that breaks my heart, but let it break your heart enough to do something about it, rather than just be mad about it.
Yeah.
Because being mad is not actually doing something.
Yeah. And I wonder too, like, part of this makes me think about how badly we misunderstand feelings and emotion as well.
Yeah.
Like, we use anger to describe a lot of our feelings, where like anger may be the broad version of that, but like there are subcategories of that like really maybe you're not angry, you're discontent in an area. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, and understanding that, but like we've been taught, I mean, earlier generations weren't taught to really understand your feelings or emotions well, or work through them. And often, I know you've shared how anger is often a secondary emotion.
It is. It's classified. Like when you're doing
Yes.
like counseling and things, anger is a secondary emotion. It's always tied to something different.
Yes.
So like let's take racism for example. The reason why you are so angry over racism is because on the deep-seated level you are very hurt by it. Now, being hurt and being angry are not the same thing, but to show how bad we've been wounded by that is a lot harder, like to be vulnerable in that way, than to just lash out in anger, right? Or like take whatever it is that you're angry about. It's always something else. Like the vast majority of times that I've yelled at my kids in public are because they embarrassed me, not because I was actually mad over what they did, because whatever they did probably didn't really matter. But anger is the expressed emotion because of the underlying embarrassment. So anger is always a secondary emotion to what we really don't want to deal with. And so like whatever that is that you're so angry about, it comes from actually probably a place that needs to be healed in the first place, and you actually rob yourself of the opportunity for God to dig under the surface and actually heal, get to the root of it.
Yes.
And start to dig up the root of like maybe it's bitterness, maybe it's discontent, like whatever it might be. Like you rob yourself of the ability for God to get up under there and fix that because you're only showing the anger rather than like, oh, this anger is tied to this trauma, it's tied to this abuse, it's tied to this self-perception issue. A lot of anger. This is what they always talk about with dudes. They always talk about small man syndrome, right? You get these like really tiny guys, and they're like the angriest people you've ever met, and it's because they're like little tiny dudes, and their whole life everyone's told them like that they're just tiny and short and like whatever, and so you get this like feistiness out of them because of that, and it's like no, really, what that is that's your insecurity about. The fact that you're not what everyone says that you're supposed to look like as a dude. You're not 6'3" with, and jacked and all this stuff. Like all that comes back to a self-image issue. That's why you're angry in all these different areas. And so really, all of that anger is masking all of this hurt. And the longer we stay angry, the less we can actually deal with the root of the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think that's so true. And the other side of that is where I think that, like, when we, because you brought up the, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, something the very first week, our group actually talked about that scripture, and we talked about how, like, often because we have insecurities or feelings or, like, areas where we're broken still, like, or, we have this sense of self-worth where we think, like, I'm not worthy, I'm not whatever, like, then it's sometimes hard to love a neighbor in the right way, because me loving myself at a certain point in my life was not good. Like, I didn't love myself well at a certain point of my life. And so in that season where I wasn't loving myself well, I hurt a lot of people because, and I was loving them as myself, but I wasn't loving myself well. I was hurting myself. And so therefore I was hurting other people. And I think there's this dynamic where, like, some people take it to that extreme of, like, of self-love and self-care and, like, whatever. But there's also this level of, understanding that and that's where, when you started the first week of seeing ourselves the way God sees us, I think that, I don't know if you meant to do it in that way. I mean, I know you meant to do it in that way, but I think it was wonderful, because I don't think that we can see others well or love others well until we see ourselves in the way that we should as well.
Yeah, I think actually there's probably a lot of people that would say that they are meeting the demand of Christ when he says to love your neighbor as yourself, because there is so much low self-esteem and insecurity in our society. So much, anxiety and depression and thoughts of negativity towards oneself. That you actually are loving your neighbor a lot of times the way that you love yourself. And maybe that's what we got to talk about this weekend, is having a better image of who we are on the positive aspect, right? Because on week one, we kind of talked about seeing ourselves as far as, our sinfulness. But, like, the other side of that coin is you also have to see yourself as made in the image of God, and as a child, if you're a Christian, as a child of God, and all these, like, you have to see yourself like that, because the more secure you are in yourself, you won't feel so attacked when someone does something that's not in alignment with what you agree with or whatnot. The more secure you are in who God's made you to be, the less offended you are.
I think that's why it doesn't really offend me when people say I don't believe in female pastors, because I am super confident in the fact that he's called me to do this. So, like, I don't really care if you believe it. Like, it doesn't bother me at all, because I know it. Like, I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And so, but I'm really secure in that area.
Yeah, that's what, like, whenever I see, like, hateful stuff about Christians or, pastors or certain, even from other Christians, like certain theological leanings, none of it bothers me, really, because I'm very secure in those areas of my life. And so I think that's a big issue, is that so many people have such negative self-perception that they don't have any option other than to live out life angry, because they're actually more upset with themselves and the fact that life's not been going well for them, or in life didn't pan out the way that I hoped it. I wish I was married by this point. I wish I had kids by this point. I thought I'd be at this level in my income by this point. So many people are just so unhappy with where they are at. They don't have any choice other than to just lash out at the world, because that's a lot easier than, going and getting a counselor and figuring out what's wrong with, why do I always feel like this?
I mean,
And doing the hard work of getting rid of that deep-seated insecurity that, like I can tell you a lot of my anger issues comes from the deep-seated insecurity that I've had since I was a kid. Like and I might even share this on Sunday, because I think that this is probably the direction I'm going to go. But, like, when my family had to move to the town that we lived in when I was in middle school and high school, we moved into a double-wide trailer behind my grandma's house because she had cancer. And my mom had to be close to take care of her, and my family wasn't like destitute, but like we were fairly, if we were middle income, we were the bottom of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Like, so like we lived in a double wide trailer, and we moved to a pretty affluent area at the time, and I'll never forget, we had this party when I first moved in for all my friends from my old school, and a kid came over and said something about the fact that I was living in a trailer now.
Right.
And that moment of embarrassment there, I can still feel what that felt like when he sat on my bed and told me that my family was poor because I lived in a trailer.
Yeah.
And that little scared, like embarrassed little boy right there, it has been the cause of a lot of the pain in my life and a lot of the stuff that I've tried to like make decisions in my life because of that insecurity and we actually, I went through this whole bout with anxiety and still deal with it. And the craziest thing, we came to the conclusion that most of my anxiety was actually insecurity.
Yeah.
I was afraid that like if something bad happened to my kids, I would look like a bad dad. If whatever, like if my church isn't a certain size, I would feel like a failure because of all of this, whatever it might be. And so like I ended up with dealing with actually, hey, all your anxiety is actually coming from the fact that you're really not that secure in who Christ made you to be.
Yeah.
And the more that I can deal with that in a healthy way, like, because you can swing that pendulum all the way over to the arrogant side, and then you become a narcissist, and then you end up becoming part of the problem. The more that you can just deal with your self-identity in a very positive way, like true humility is only agreeing with what God says is true about you. So it's not like telling myself how awful, horrible, nasty, terrible I am.
Right.
But it's also not thinking that I'm just like
the best.
the king of the world either.
Yeah.
Like it's just saying, all right, God, whatever you say is true about me, I will agree with that. And so the more I've been able to do that, the more I've been able to get away from that little boy that always felt like when I moved to this new town, and I would go to 2 parties a weekend sometimes in this town that we lived in, because all the kids I went to school with, for the most part, were fairly affluent, and I would go to these huge 2-story houses, and they would have the best snacks and drinks and all this stuff for 6th graders and 7th graders, and they would have CD players and lights and stuff for you to be dancing in their living room, and I had a birthday party in middle school, and then we had to do it at the South Charleston Rec Center, and nobody showed up. And I was invited to every single party.
Yeah.
Right? I would have been part of the in crowd or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But when it was mine, nobody showed up. And that marked me right there.
Yeah.
And so I think we drastically underestimate how much our own insecurities actually affect how angry we are right now.
Absolutely. That's so good. Well, Colossians use a text from Colossians 3, and verse 6 is a little interesting in the middle of all this stuff about getting rid of anger. And so I just want to flesh that out a little bit more with you, because verse 6, it says, because of these sins, the anger of God is coming.
Yeah, it's interesting in a passage that's getting ready to tell Christians that they should get rid of their anger, that like, hey, if you choose not to live in this way, the anger of God is coming for you. And it does seem a little bit hypocritical, but it comes back to that notion, like, why is it that God is allowed to have righteous anger and we are not? It's because he has a character that can actually handle it. He doesn't sin in his anger the way that 100% of the time when I'm angry, if I'm not careful, I will sin. I will, at the very least, I will have a thought about someone that I wish that I had not had. I will say something. Like when I'm angry, like, and this is probably true of everyone, but for me, when I'm angry, I want to tell everyone how angry I am. And that's gossip. That's just, it's gossip. And there's a sense in which I could tell myself, like, justify it and go like, well, like, you're so angry, like, you're just venting. No, I'm just venting. It's like, no, you're gossiping. That's what you're doing, and you're sinning in the midst of it.
I think I did that earlier.
Right? I mean, it happens, right?
Yeah.
And, like, that, but, like, for God, he doesn't do that. He doesn't sin in his anger. So he gets anger. Like the scriptures talk about how vengeance belongs to God. It does not belong to us. All he ever asked his church to do was to love. He'll take care of all the vengeance stuff. I think that where the church got messed up is like they wanted the vengeance side.
Yeah.
They want to be able to wag their finger in people's face. They want to be judge, jury, and executioner on behalf of God, because the love side of it is really hard.
It is hard.
It's so hard, and being mean to people is so easy, and honestly kind of fun at times, right? And whereas being loving, that is so hard. And that's why the church kind of took on this role of like, oh, well, we'll just go ahead and purify the world for you, God. We'll take care of this. We'll go and we'll take care of all them sinners for you. And it's like, that's not what I asked you to do.
Right.
All I asked you to do was to go and love them. I will sort out all that. The anger of God is coming. And I feel like we read stuff like that and we go like, yeah, but just in case it doesn't, let me go ahead and give a little anger on your behalf, just in case you don't follow through on that.
Yeah. It's like this lack of trust again on God. Like, we'll trust him with our eternity, but we won't trust him to take care of this issue or that issue or these people or like whatever. Or like see how he has come through for his people over and over again in the past. Like that we think he won't do it again or, you know, it's not in our timeline, so it's not good enough or whatever. But, I think we have to remember that like God is holy, and as a holy God, he can't be around sin. And so if he can't be around sin, he can't sin. And so we have to understand that God is a holy God who cannot sin. And so he has that character, that full, pure character, that he can have those emotions and not sin. And because we are made in his image, we have those emotions too. Like we have those things, but we have to be able to understand them and realize what to do with them. Like, you know, we had that special time of prayer at the end, and like just without saying too much, like one person saying, like, I just didn't realize how much I'd not let go. Like how much I was bullied as a kid, and you know, and just I have a lot of bitterness, and I just haven't let that go. Like there's so much of that like, you know, you as a little boy, me as a little girl being told I was dirty, and like, you know, different things like that that just stick with you. That it does take a lot of work to get down deep in the root of things, to begin to dig that up. And it's not easy. Like it can be painful in those times to like pull all that back up and work through it. But the result of that is going to be a much better you and a much better world because of that. And so like just to end, you know, you shared about how if you want to be more like him, you have to be with him, right? Like to be, the more that you are with him, the more you'll be like him. And so we want to be like God, who is just absolutely full of grace, full of truth, fully loving, you know, and able to really just share that image of who he is with the world. And to do that, we have to be spending time with God. And sometimes that does look like spending time with other people who know him, who can help you work through these things. I think too much of our lives we have spent not wanting to share with anybody those deep hurt things that we've buried down deep. And so we don't work through them, we don't heal through them, and we need to do the hard work to be able to really truly be who we are supposed to be in the world. So anyway, it was a great day, great conversation. We have a couple more weeks of this series, and we hope to see you again next week as we give you more practical next steps for your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.